This is HR in Review, a podcast dedicated to HR thought leadership, actionable advice, and all the latest developments in human resource management.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the newest episode of our podcast, HR in Review. I'm Monica Sharma, the editor of HRreview, and if you haven't tuned in before, in this short segment we'll be looking back at some recent standout stories and we'll be discussing the most relevant topics linked to HR. Each week will be based around a different theme, and this week's is returning to work and how HR can navigate this. Here today I'm joined by my guest, Kate Palmer. Kate, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course, Monica. Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Palmer. I am the HR Advisory and Consultancy Director at an organisation called Peninsula. We're a HR, employment law and health and safety consultancy firm, and it's good to be with you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So I wanted to kick things off by talking about some research conducted by YouGov, which analysed the preferences of work models moving forward. So in this research, over half of workers surveyed said that they wanted to work from home post-pandemic, 57%. And of this number, a fifth said that they wanted to work from home full-time, whilst over a third, 37%, wanted the flexibility to work from home on some days. So, Kate, this kind of supports the, general consensus that hybrid working is the model that most businesses are looking to adopt moving forward. But my question to you would be, how can businesses deal with a situation where the employer wants workers to return to the office, but staff don't want to?
Yeah, a tough one and a very common one, I would stress at this moment in time, what with the opening post or at the end of the pandemic, so to speak. But yeah, it is a tough one. What the first thing I would say, Monica, is I've seen a real mix, to be quite honest, of appetite for home working, returning back to the office. Across our client base, we've seen a real mix, and it's not one size fits all. And I think that's the important thing to stress. There are many organisations that are embracing home working permanently or hybrid. There are many organisations that are asking people to return. And on the latter, it can be quite difficult. I think the first thing I would say is, as a business, the staff, the workforce need to understand the why. Right. Why are you wanting the team to return to work and return to the office? Why is that more beneficial for you as an organisation? What have you observed over the past 18 months to lead to that position? And I think that's the key starting point, an explanation to the team of why. And that in itself may persuade reluctant parties to return. If not, then it comes down to one-to-one conversations with those individuals.
So it's really all about establishing a kind of line of communication, being clear about why exactly you want businesses and employees to return back to the office, and then being able to communicate that to them.
Absolutely. I think, there are some roles, there are some organisations, there are some industries where home working is just not conducive to the way forward. And in those circumstances, if you can provide a really objective, clear, succinct, explanatory rationale for the return, often that in itself will help people understand your business reasons for requesting a return. But communication is absolutely fundamental and key.
I think it's quite interesting as well, because the research said that almost 3/4 of respondents wanted or expect their employers to allow them to work from home after the pandemic and to give them that option. So there is that kind of expectation on the employee side. And I guess if the employers don't fulfill that, this could end up being quite a prevalent issue to navigate for HR teams moving forward.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I mean, I think people have formed a view or an assumption that, it's worked for 18 months in their view. It can work moving forward, but the employer may not see it in that way. And I think, again, it then comes back to that explanation of why, in the employer's view, it isn't going to work. And I suppose, importantly, from a legal perspective, if an individual's contracted or contracts of employment and terms of employment are pointed towards the fact that they are based in an office, there is no free-for-all, there is no obligation for the employee to permit home working, so it very much depends on the position pre-pandemic as well as to whether that will be a permanent fixture moving forward.
So that's interesting, actually. So that means anything that's been written up into the employee's contract will then be sustained for post-pandemic, most likely, unless there is a explicit change of terms of employment.
Follow us on Twitter at HRreview or join us on LinkedIn and Facebook.
Yeah, fundamental to any employment relationship is the contract. So, for any employee that's assuming, because they've worked at home for the past 6 months or longer maybe,
Right.
that they will then lead to permanent home working, it's not necessarily the case. So one has to look back to the terms of employment. This whole situation has been so reactive, hasn't it? Most things have been arranged on a temporary basis, and that would lead to the fact that contractually many staff are obliged to return to the workplace. It's how the employer then responds to that, and what decisions they make with regards to the very issue.
Right, that's really interesting. The second part of the research from YouGov showed that a fifth of workers nationally and close to 3 in 10 in London are considering moving to a different area of the country that is not within commuting distance of their company's workplace. Kate, with employees no longer working in close proximity to offices, will this have a big impact on HR policy?
Yeah, I do think, again, it depends on the context of the role, the industry you are in and so forth. But isn't it brilliant, really, that some staff have that freedom to move around the country? That's a real pro and could be a real motivational tool for many a business out there to have their workforce spread, because that's what they want. And it can be a real motivator. But for some industries, that could be really problematic. I mean, there are other things to think about, therefore, if that does happen. Supervision and really good communication with people that are working remotely. What about, there's lots of talk of people moving abroad. What if there's a time difference? I know that's probably going to be few and far between, but it could be an issue. And if your core hours are a Greenwich Mean Time 9 till 5 and someone moves to America, extreme, but how are you going to deal with that? And there's also things around inclusivity, less about HR policy as such, but how do you bring the team together when people are remotely based and spread across the country or the world? That you really need to think about bringing people together, inclusivity. What if you have an on-site training day? Is that going to cause a problem? How do you navigate that? So I think if your workforce does become extremely remote, there's a list of things you probably need to go through to consider to ensure that you are managing it appropriately.
Right. Yeah, I think definitely having employees spread out in different locations, especially if it's, in a different country, then that could pose some serious, problems for the company culture and just generally the sense of togetherness within the country. Definitely.
I was going to say belonging. You took an equivalent word right out of my mouth there, Monica. But, if you're, there's nothing better, is there, than having a team social event. And the things that you probably think are quite menial, but really important to team dynamic, coming together on a Friday after work, having a drink, going out for a meal, doing a team event, a training day, all those things become more problematic and difficult to navigate. And I do personally believe they can have a detrimental impact if you are literally never seeing a team member face to face and in person.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been a strange time for businesses because now they're able to hire outside of their kind of immediate area, which means a much larger talent pool. But then on the opposite end, you have the challenge of bringing employees together and then now potentially dealing with employees moving to different parts of the country or moving abroad entirely.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point about an employer's ability to penetrate different job markets because, ourselves here in, my organisation has a head office in Manchester and, we have embraced home working as well. And it's brilliant to be able to source HR professionals from everywhere in the UK, not having to be based in Manchester. It's a real positive. But of course, we have to very carefully consider how we ensure those individuals are kept as part of the team.
Yeah,
so we will have social events where we'll pay for overnight stays. We need to bring people together regardless of where they are based. But it is a very good plus point for many businesses from a recruitment perspective, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with you there, Kate. So to move on to the second story, it's kind of tied into what we were just talking about. But recently, key members of the government's flexible working task force stated that flexible working should be offered to all employees, and this should happen to avoid the creation of a two-tier workforce. So within this, research found that only a minority of employers, I think 30% according to the CIPD, are looking to introduce new types of flexible working over the next year. However, the task force is advocating for this to be the default and for businesses to introduce flexible options when advertising for roles. So I think Peter Cheese, who is the chief executive of the CIPD and co-chair of the task force, even suggested that employers should be made to publish data regarding flexible working. So quite similarly to gender pay gap data being published each year.
Yes.
So, Kate, what is the best practice for employers to handle remote working requests moving forward?
If you have any comments on the HR in Review podcast, would like to suggest a topic or speaker, or provide other feedback, you can contact us using the email podcast@hrreview.co.uk. We look forward to hearing from you.
I appreciate the task force, and I appreciate the differing opinions on embracing flexible working. And again, I apologise for keep saying it, but that is very context organisation specific. What I would say is, looking at the here and now, there is already a statutory process in place for individuals to request flexible working, home working falling under the definition of such. If you have 26 weeks service with an organisation, you can put in a request for flexible working. Now, clearly there are parameters within that because of the length of service, and you can only make one request every 12 months if you do qualify. Some businesses, because of their industry, because of the controls they want in place, will absolutely maintain that stance. They will stick to the statutory process, the statutory right for individuals. However, that isn't to say that organisations can't choose to go broader and wider and implement that day one right as suggested and referenced, or even go one step further, put in an advert the flexibility that you could be given should you apply for that job. It could be really beneficial for attraction of candidates. It could be really beneficial for motivation. But again, it really does depend on businesses and what they want to achieve and where they're at in the business life cycle and the maturity of that organisation, what they do. So it is specific to the facts, I would say, Monica.
I think it was interesting as well because recently the government said that they were considering scrapping, that period of time before you're allowed to put in another remote working request. What do you think of that, Kate?
Yeah, personally, do I think that will happen? I would say so. I don't think it will be imminently, but I think in the next few years that will happen. I think you can feel, even in different demographics in an organisation, you can feel a different thrust or desire to embrace flexible working. Certainly a lot of the younger demographics in organisations, they see that as part and parcel of a role. Work-life balance is so key to everyday life. So yeah, it's been mentioned. I've read many an article on it in the CIPD articles themselves. And do I think it will happen? Probably, yes, because you can feel that the world of work is leaning towards that, and it's what people want. But I could be proven wrong, Monica. Who knows?
I think time will tell with that one, but it will be definitely a big change for employers to handle if that does come into play.
Yes, definitely so.
So I think, again, what we were just talking about ties in quite closely to diversity and inclusion. All companies kind of want to believe that they're championing and creating a kind of culture which is inclusive and, fair for all. But research over the past year has actually shown that a fifth of people with disabilities have had their working from home requests denied during the pandemic, and over 7 in 10 mothers had their furlough requests denied at the start of this year. So I think this poses a key question, Kate. How can companies ensure that they're offering the same flexibility for, employees operating under different work models or that just generally have different life circumstances?
Yeah, I think this kind of ties into what we were discussing before, Monica, on how you manage different work models, different areas of the organisation and so forth. The important thing I would probably say is, compare a person that's returned to the office as opposed to someone that's had a flexible working arrangement arranged, maybe part-time hours, home working because of childcare arrangements. If they're doing the same role, the only difference in those two individuals will be their place of work. All the other terms and conditions should be the same. So what I would say is the thing that you have to navigate is how you ensure that those are treated consistently, fairly, reasonably. And a lot of it reverts back to what we were discussing, Monica, in terms of the comms, inclusivity. How do you ensure the individual working at home is brought into training, feels part of the team? And again, a lot of it comes back to comms. A good, strong leader who is able to apply different techniques and approaches to those two individuals so they feel the same. A lot of it is comms.
Right. Because I think you have to constantly be reviewing policies and making sure that everything is fair and consistent, and trying to navigate around potential location issues or flexibility issues.
For sure. I mean, even in terms of, there may well be technology issues for the individual work. Let's say, I'm trying to think of a practical example. If there was technology issues, meaning that their productivity on a certain day was lesser, and then they didn't get a pay rise because of that compared to the individual in the office, you have to make exceptions. You have to change your approach. You have to think about the differences in the way of work that could influence an individual unfairly and put them at a detriment through no control of their own. And you have to overcome that. So it's a very different way of thinking as a manager. Not one size will fit all, and they have to be agile and adaptable and think on the feet, really, because you've not got a team just sat in front of you who you can shout out to and give instruction to and work with. You've got to think differently. And some managers will struggle with that. Right,
because it's so different to anything that they've ever experienced before, I suppose.
It's so different, and I think we use the term in our management team a lot of emotional intelligence. I think you're tapping into a completely different skill set where you're having to gauge how a person feels when they're not sat in front of you, and it's just a different way of working, which I think a lot of managers will need specific training around because it's just not part of their normal way of thinking.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because it's one thing to kind of manage employees that are sitting in front of you, but then an entirely different experience trying to gauge how an employee feels when you don't see them in person anymore.
Why not subscribe to the premium version of HR in Review? You'll get ad-free content, early and extra episodes and more. Even better, although it's the premium edition, it's absolutely free. Sign up at hrreview.co.uk/podcast.
Without a doubt, literally if you're on a video call, Zoom or Teams, you're seeing shoulders to head. You're not seeing is the foot tapping, the hands, are they shaking? Do they look nervous? What are they doing when they come off that video? All those subtle indications to gauge how an individual feels, you've just lost. So it's really important you find ways and means of overcoming that. And I do think regular face-to-face contact, personally, I don't think you can beat anything more than that, and building that into your management processes where you have a check-in in person.
Right. Finally, Kate, I had one last question for you, which kind of ties into the challenges that we were talking about. What are the key and immediate logistical challenges that HR will have to face when businesses open up next month?
Okay. Well, fingers crossed firstly that businesses are opening next month. We will find out soon. But I think the first thing is don't wait until the 21st of June, if that ends up being the date, to communicate and explain your stance to your staff. I think what you should be doing here and now at the end of May is explaining to your staff your stance on home working, how you're going to navigate that, the reasons why, and giving that real inroad and headway into the opening up, should it be on the 21st of June. And then it allows you between now and then to obviously communicate the stance, but have those one-to-one conversations with any reluctant parties who feel concerned or worried for whatever reason that may be. And each individual may have a different reason. You can have those individual discussions between now and then. You can try and iron out any concerns, use any reassurance techniques to aid a return to work or a home working position, should that be the case, and stress what COVID secure measures you've put in place, show videos. You've got time then. I think the key thing is 21st of June will come extraordinarily quickly. Act now, think now, communicate now, and address any concerns with your team between now and then.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for joining me on the show today and sharing your expertise. I think that this episode has answered loads of pressing questions that employers and HR have about moving forward into the kind of murky post-pandemic working world. As I mentioned earlier, Kate Palmer does work at Peninsula, which is a HR consultancy, and can be reached there. Thanks again, Kate.
Pleasure. Thank you, Monica.
No worries. So if you enjoyed this, we also do have webinars on Inside HR, which will delve into similar topics. Our next webinar is on Thursday, the 10th of June, which is about how businesses can build a sustainable diversity and inclusion talent strategy. We also have one on the week after, the 17th of June, which is about how to rebuild trust in the recruitment process. As always, if you're interested in learning more about the future work or any other topic linked to HR, head over to our website, HRreview.co.uk. Thanks once again to Kate for joining us and our audience for listening. We hope to see you again in 2 weeks' time, where we will be continuing the discussion on the most relevant HR topics. See you then.
The HR in Review podcast is brought to you by HRreview.co.uk. HRreview.co.uk is a website dedicated to human resources and related professionals. News items are posted daily, together with analysis looking in depth at topical HR issues. You can sign up for our range of specialist newsletters at hrreview.co.uk/sign-up and follow us on Twitter at HRreview, or join us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you for listening.